You are now tuned into the Victims Advocate podcast with the Victims Advocate himself, Brandon Stein. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Victim Advocate podcast. My name is Brandon Stein, and I'm joined today by immigration attorney Amanda Gagliano. Amanda, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Brandon. How are you doing?
I'm great. So where I want to start today is the Diddy trial. So I know that you do immigration law. You are not a criminal defense lawyer. You do not try cases such as the Diddy trial. But one of the counts for the indictment is trafficking and racketeering, criminal enterprises across state lines. But really, from a trafficking standpoint, that's where I wanted to start, because the trial's underway this week, and one of the first witnesses called was Cassie Ventura, who's Diddy's former girlfriend, and she's the I guess the star witness for the prosecution. She was listed as victim one. So my question for you is, when it comes to trafficking, is trafficking, when it comes to sex crimes or sex trafficking, are there different components to trafficking? Are there other types of trafficking in your experience? So we could delineate the distinction between what's going on in that Diddy trial.
Absolutely. So there's, when people think of human trafficking, they think of it in the general terms of, sex trafficking or transporting people, specifically over state lines or international borders, and maybe selling people or selling commercial sex acts and that sort of thing. That's the general thing when people think of what human trafficking is. But from an immigration standpoint, it's important to know that you can actually get a green card and get immigration benefits if you're a victim of trafficking in general. So the trafficking visa was actually called the T visa. T stands for trafficking. And the trafficking visa for the T visa, it's a very broad sense of the term of trafficking. So someone can actually get, immigration relief if they're a victim of labor trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, if they're just the victim of, being essentially exploited by someone else. That can technically qualify them for a T visa if certain other criteria are met. And it's important to know that human trafficking in general has three overall elements. There's the act, the means, the purpose. The act is generally the act of, constitutes recruiting someone, transferring custody to a person over to another person. And that, once again, like I said, that can be across international borders or across state lines, as that's being done in the Diddy trial right now.
So let me ask you just about the Diddy trial. So this is in federal court. So we obviously don't have any cameras. So that's why when you look and you see takeaways from the trial, we're always seeing these terrible paintings. This is depicting Cassie Ventura. So what I read here on CNN was that Diddy, or Sean Combs, which is his real name, and his inner circle, they use threats, violence, drugs, bribery, arson, kidnappings to coerce Ventura and other women into, in this case, it's sexual performances, so the freak-offs. So my question to you is, from your area of practice, is there similar, I guess, tactics that are used when we're talking about trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or not?
Yes, absolutely. So specifically in the Diddy trial, the means of force, coercion, and fraud that Diddy or Mr. Combs allegedly used against Cassie Ventura, for instance, in this case specifically, is surveillance footage. So he essentially had filmed the freak-offs of Cassie, being involved in these sex acts with other escorts. So he had that surveillance footage of her. He recorded everything. So basically what he did with her specifically, he specifically did coerce her into participating in these freak-offs. He used drugs to fuel the sex acts with her specifically. And then he promised her specifically career opportunities and financial support. That's what kind of wheeled her into, a relationship with him, which led to doing the freak-offs. From an immigration standpoint, what I often see with my immigration clients is that they are often forced or coerced into doing specific acts, or providing labor and services through means of coercion and force. When another person who is not the immigrant in the case, will talk down to them and essentially threaten to call ICE or to call the police over them, or threaten them with deportation proceedings, to essentially coerce the immigrant into performing the specific kind of act or providing that service. So they're essentially doing this out of fear of deportation.
Right. So that's not. I guess that's the only element missing that we've seen from the victims that have been disclosed thus far, is the non-legal status component. Now,
right, correct.
My question is, you mentioned videotaping.
Yes.
From what you've seen, is that a tactic used in terms of some sort of like extortion or something along those lines, as part of controlling?
Absolutely. So specifically in the Diddy's trial, he's using that as blackmail and leverage against her to kind of keep her from opening her mouth and leaving him, because he would have that over her and threaten to leak this footage. In immigration cases, I don't often see too much surveillance in terms of video footage of the immigrant. But what I do see is surveillance in general. So essentially, I've seen trafficking cases from a domestic standpoint, from a labor standpoint, from a domestic violence standpoint as well. For instance, in domestic violence trafficking cases, I've seen a spouse using force control over the victim and kind of surveilling that person's every move, telling them, you can't speak with this person, taking their phone away, limiting their access to communication to reach out to other people. And really, sometimes when they do have the phone, they really go through their contact list, go through their messages, surveilling who they're speaking with, questioning who they're speaking with, just to make sure the victim, the immigrant in this case, doesn't get out, essentially. So surveillance can be seen in a variety of different matters, in ways, not necessarily with a camera footage, but surveillance is something that I do often see across many cases.
Yeah, and to that point, what's been reported is that Cassie Ventura testified, part of her testimony was that she got to a point where she just did not feel like she had much of a choice.
Correct.
So when you use these tactics, even in the labor context, if you have
Yes.
forced work, not sex work or whatever we have going on here, is it the same type of mental game of gymnastics where the victim
Absolutely.
feels that way?
Yes, absolutely, because like I said, with the victim in this case, they feel like they don't necessarily have a choice. They're here, they're in a vulnerable situation, state of mind. They don't feel like they can get another job necessarily. Sometimes they are here without status, or even if they do have status, but they haven't reached the point of getting their green card. They feel like they're stuck and they really have to obey to the commander-in-chief, being the employer, or the spouse or other person who's really dictating and coercing them and controlling their moves. So it really is the same mental game of gymnastics. These people often feel like they don't have any other choice. They feel like they have to submit to the orders because they think they're going to be jailed, prisoned, thrown out of the country. So they often endure a lot of abuse and unfortunate circumstances just out of fear, essentially.
Well, in this case, I guess it's not risk of deportation. It's more risk from a career standpoint, where Ventura was signed at the age of 19 to Diddy's label. And eventually they struck this relationship. And ultimately, I guess psychologically from her standpoint, when she feels like she didn't have much of a choice, it was, well, if I run away or somehow get out of this type of life, is my career going to go down the toilet? So there's that leverage point, I guess,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had also seen that he had actually promised her 10 albums, but they only got to one album, and they couldn't even get to the other albums because the freak-offs became her full-time job. Essentially, she was, involved in these sex acts that lasted up to days at a time. I remember seeing, the longest freak-off lasting up to 4 days. And then she just had to recuperate herself to get through her week. So there was not much music and, recording going on at that time. And, given the fact that he had the video footage of her and threatened to leak that out to the public, she was afraid more for her image, her public standpoint, how the people would view her. And of course, there goes her music career as well. So
Yeah,
different tactics, but it's all the same thing at the end of the day.
and what's interesting is the defense is saying that Diddy had just a different sex life, and this was more consensual. This was
Right.
domestic
Domestic
related.
violence.
Right.
Yes.
So my question is, and this is the last point I want to make on this, but where's the line drawn in terms of, okay, it's more of a domestic situation, it's not trafficking, as to, okay, now it's reached the level of it qualifies as trafficking, and if you're dealing with immigrants, they're eligible for a T visa.
Right. So I really think it is a case of trafficking, specifically because there was exploitation, there was forced labor, there was involuntary servitude, there's the recruitment of people. Specifically in this case, he had her or other people help in, paying escorts to come, traveling over state lines. They had these freak-offs happening from Miami to LA to New York to Ibiza and Spain, I had seen. And he really had a criminal enterprise going on. So it wasn't just him. He had several people under him, pulling the strings as well. So he had the people coming to set up the rooms, setting up the contacts, and really putting this whole show and skit together, which was just terrible. So in my opinion, it does qualify as a RICO, what they're being alleged of in this case.
Crossing state lines, and it was certainly a criminal enterprise. I think it's a tough defense argument to say it's purely domestic because of the extent of the individuals and entities involved, and crossing state lines, country lines. Crazy.
Right. The only way I see this trial going a different route is if Cassie essentially consented to everything. So, and I did see in the trial specifically that there was text messages where she would say, "Oh, I can't wait. I'm excited for the next freak off." And so the defense would say, why would you say these things if you did not want to participate in the freak offs? And, like many victims say, she said that out of fear, because when she did not want to participate in the freak off, she would be beaten up, she'd be dragged. There was that footage that leaked from the Intercontinental Hotel in, I believe, New York or LA, where you see Diddy really dragging her across the floor and pounding on her because she was trying to get out.
Yeah.
Yes, because she was trying to get out of the freak off and she didn't want to participate in there. So she eventually lied and, concealed her true feelings and, said she wanted to participate just out of fear, because she knew that if she didn't say that, she would probably get beaten up or something worse can happen to her. And, it's funny, I can tie this into one of my cases. I'm obviously not going to get into the details and keep it as confidential as possible, but I actually have represented someone who was a worker at one of the hotels, and she was a cleaning service lady in the hotels, kind of like a maid. She would do the beds and that sort of thing. And there was the hotel manager who knew that she had, she had no status at that point. She was pending for an immigration case. And he took advantage of her. So he would tell her, meet me at this hotel room at this time, and he would rape her, take advantage of her. And she, obviously it was not consensual, but she went there and she participated in the acts out of fear, because he told her, you're here in the country without status. I'm a U.S. citizen, you are not. If you don't participate, I will call the police on you. I will get you and your family deported, get your kids taken, custody away from you. So they use all these tactics to instill fear in the victim's mind, which leads them to, it appears that, from a third person standpoint, sometimes as if they're consenting and to the involvement, but it's not free and unequivocal consent that they're giving.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, the commonality is a leverage point that they find, with these victims, and it's just horrible. But we're only victim one. I mean, I don't know how many victims were named in the indictment, but this trial is going to go on for days upon days, and I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about. But Amanda, let me ask you, where can people find you? They need to find you.
Yes.
Immigration-wise, of course.
Yes, so my office is based in Aventura, Florida, but immigration is actually federal law. So I have clients across different states. We're serving all 50 states across the USA. You can reach me on my direct line, which is 813-444-9724. law firm name is Gagliano Law. You can find us on our website and our Instagram page, Gagliano Law, as well. We'll all be providing more content, information. We give free consultations to certain immigration case matters. We also speak Spanish, French, and Italian, and obviously English. So it'd be a pleasure to help anyone throughout any of their kind of immigration cases that they're facing.
Well, Amanda, appreciate the insight.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on the Victims Advocate podcast with Brandon Stein, and we'll see you on the next one. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Victim Advocate, on YouTube at The Victims Advocate, and visit our website at victimadvocate.com.